I stare at the cream-colored wedding invitation in my trembling hands, the elegant script announcing my daughter's marriage to a man half my age, and suddenly the room tilts. To that stifling summer when Drive, Ellen of Oss moved into our guest room. She was the urologist who had treated my late husband with such careful professionalism, her gloved hands knowing secrets no one else should. At 68 she carried herself with quiet authority, silver hair pinned neatly, yet that first night she arrived exhausted from her final shift. I found her in the dim hallway, thin silk robe slipping open just at the collar. The soft curve beneath caught the low light for one heartbeat. Before she drew the fabric closed with a murmured, "Forgive an old woman her carelessness." Her scent drifted toward me, then lavender laced with something antiseptic, clean yet warmly intimate. My breath stalled. She was old enough to be my mother. She had held my husband's most private vulnerabilities in those steady hands. Why did heat bloom low in my belly at the mere glimpse? The very next morning we sat across the small kitchen table, coffee steaming between us. Eleanor reached for the sugar and her knee brushed mine under the wood. Just fabric against fabric, yet a jolt traveled up my thigh like static before a storm. She smiled politely, speaking of retirement and gratitude for the temporary room while her condo was renovated. I nodded, stirring my cup too vigorously. Inside my head the thought spun wild. She's old enough to be my mother. A respected doctor who once examined my husband with clinical detachment. So why is my pulse racing like this? Why can I stop noticing how the morning light catches the silver strands at her temples, softening every line? By the end of that first week a quiet rhythm had settled over the house. I cooked simple dinners, pasta with garlic and rosemary, while Ellen us at the table with those precise, surgeon-like movements. One evening the warm smells filled the kitchen as we stood side by side at the sink washing dishes. Soap suds slipped down her forearm in slow trails. I handed her the towel, and our fingers lingered a second too long. The warmth of her skin lingered on mine even after she pulled away. My internal voice whispered urgently, "This is just politeness, nothing more." She's lonely after losing her own husband years ago. Stop imagining things. Stop feeling the way her nearness makes the air feel thicker, heavier, like gravity itself is shifting toward her. Yet every shared glance across the table pulled me deeper. Her voice when she thanked me for the meal carried a low timbre that settled somewhere behind my ribs. I told myself it was gratitude, simple human connection after months of empty rooms and echoing silence. But when she laughed softly at some small mishap with the plates, the sound curled around me warm and unexpected. And I forgot how to breathe for a moment. She was my guest. A year older than my own mother would have been. A woman whose career had revolved around the most intimate fragilities of the body. I should have felt only respect. Something restless stirred whenever our paths crossed in the narrow hallway, an almost touch that never quite happened yet left me aching with the possibility. That first week ended with me lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the brush of her knee, the linger of fingers, the way her robe had slipped that very first night. Shame burned my cheeks even as a deeper hunger whispered that perhaps lonely thing we shared, and then the storm came. The power flickered out one humid evening, thunder rolling close. We lit candles and opened a bottle of red wine to chase away the sudden chill. As the alcohol loosened our tongues, Eleanor's voice grew quieter, confessing how empty her bed had felt for the last decade. Her words cracked on the last syllable. Without thinking, I reached across the couch and squeezed her hand. The texture of her skin surprisingly smooth, almost paper-thin, sent electricity racing up my arm. I should have let go. I should have remembered she was here only temporarily, that she had once been my husband's doctor. Instead I held on, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers mirroring my own. This is wrong. My mind screamed even as warmth spread through me like spilled wine. She's my guest. I'm supposed to be the caretaker here, not whatever this pull is becoming. Yet when she looked at me through the candlelight, eyes dark and unguarded, the air between us thickened with everything we weren't saying. Her knee found mine again under the low table, this time without the excuse of reaching for sugar. Neither of us moved away. The rain lashed the windows, but inside the house the real storm was only just beginning. And I had no idea how to stop it from pulling me under. Late one night, the house was quiet except for the faint notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat drifting from her room. The melody slipped under my door like an invitation I hadn't asked for. I told myself I was only checking if she needed anything, yet my feet carried me down the hallway until I stood just outside her slightly open door. The scent of her night cream hung in the air, lavender mixed with something clinical that still made my stomach tighten. Through the narrow gap I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed in a loose nightgown, the fabric fallen off one shoulder. Her hands moved slowly, rubbing lotion into the delicate skin of her thighs with the same careful precision she once used in surgery. Each stroke was gentle, almost reverent, and I couldn't look away. She's a year older than my own mother would be, I thought, shame flooding hot through my chest. I shouldn't be standing here watching an old woman care for herself like this, but the way her fingers pressed and smoothed, the faint gleam of cream catching the lamplight on skin that had seen decades of life and loss, something deep inside me stirred awake. A hunger I had no name for yet refused to name. I backed away before she could sense me, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the music couldn't cover it. In my own bed I lay staring at the dark, replaying the scene until my palms grew damp. This is madness. She's Dr. Ellen Voss, the urologist who held my husband's most private struggles in her gloved hands. Now those same hands were touching her own body with such quiet tenderness, and all I could think about was how they might feel on mine. The next evening a sudden summer storm knocked the power out with one violent crack. Thunder shook the windows as rain hammered the roof. We found candles and matches, then opened a bottle of red wine to keep the chill at bay. The flames danced across her face while we sat on the couch, knees almost touching under the low coffee table. As the wine warmed us, Elena's voice softened. She spoke of the long empty years since her own husband passed, how the bed felt too wide, the nights too silent. Her words caught on the last breath, and without thinking I reached across and took her hand. Her skin was surprisingly smooth, thin as tissue yet warm, and the contact sent a slow current straight up my arm. I should pull away now. My mind begged. She's my guest, nearly 70, a respected doctor who once treated the man I loved. I'm supposed to offer comfort, not this. This trembling need blooming under my ribs, but her fingers curled slightly around mine and neither of us let go. The candlelight made shadows flicker across her silver hair, and I noticed how her breathing had changed, shallower, matching my own. We talked until the bottle was nearly empty. Voices low, confessions spilling like the rain outside. Every shared silence felt heavier than the last. When she finally said goodnight, her eyes lingered on my mouth for one heartbeat too long before she turned away. I stayed on the couch long after her door clicked shut, wine and wants whirling together until I cowled at tell, which made me dizzy. Morning light brought no relief. We decided to tackle the laundry together, folding sheets still warm from the dryer in the dim utility room. Elena struggled with a heavy fitted sheet, arms not quite strong enough after years of delicate surgical work. Without a word I stepped behind her to help, my front brushing lightly against her back as I reached around to grasp the corners. She didn't step forward. Instead she leaned back into me for the briefest moment, her body soft and yielding through the thin cotton of her blouse. The warmth of her pressed against me made my breath catch hard in my throat. "You're stronger than you look," she murmured, voice low and close enough that I felt the words against my collarbone. My hands trembled on the fabric. This is only practical, I told myself fiercely. She's an older woman whose back aches from gardening yesterday. I'm simply helping her manage the chore, nothing more. Yet the scent of her skin, lavender cream and faint antiseptic too, filled my lungs, and my mind kept whispering how perfectly she fit against me, how right the weight of her felt. We finished folding in silence, broken only by the soft rustle of cloth. Every time our arms brushed, I felt that same electric pull. Stronger now, impossible to ignore. She glanced at me once, a small knowing smile touching her lips before she looked away. My pulse raced with the terrible, thrilling thought that perhaps she felt it too. Later that afternoon I caught myself lingering near her closed door again, listening for any sound that might tell me she was thinking of last night the way I was. The ache had settled low in my belly, warm and insistent, refusing to be reasoned away. She's old enough to be my mother. I repeated like a prayer. She was my husband's doctor. This cannot happen. But the storm inside me was already raging harder than the one that had taken the lights, and I was no longer sure I wanted it to stop. I began making excuses to walk past her bathroom door when it stayed just a crack open. One humid afternoon, the steam still hung thick in the air, and I paused there longer than I should have. Through the narrow gap I saw her standing after her shower, water tracing slopes down the gentle curve of her belly, catching on the faint silver lines of old surgical scars that spoke of a lifetime spent healing others. She looked so human then, this woman who had once commanded operating rooms and held my husband's most private vulnerabilities in steady hands. Something possessive twisted deep inside my chest, sharp and unfamiliar. She has spent decades fixing what others dared not touch, I thought. Pulse hammering against my ribs. Now I want to be the one who traces those same places where no one has reached in years. What kind of woman am I becoming, craving the very body that once brought my family comfort in crisis? The thought should have sent me fleeing down the hall. Instead, I stayed rooted, breath shallow, until she reached for a towel and the moment broke. Her lower back pain returned worse than before after an afternoon in the garden. I offered to rub in the heating cream she kept tucked in the cabinet, telling myself it was only neighborly kindness. She lay on her stomach across the edge of her bed, blouse lifted just enough to bare the warm skin of her lower back. My palms moved in slow circles at first, careful, professional. Then something shifted. My fingers dared lower, tracing the dip where spine met waistband, pressing with a pressure that felt less like medicine and more like worship. Elena let out a soft, involuntary sound that traveled straight through me, low and trembling, settling like heat between my thighs. "Careful, dear," she whispered, voice husky against the pillow. "You're making an old woman remember what desire feels like after so long." Screamed at me to stop this instant, to pull my hands away and pretend none of it had happened. Yet my fingers kept drawing those lazy circles, inching closer to the edge of her pants, testing boundaries I had no right to test. "It's only medical," I lied to myself fiercely. She is a doctor herself. She understands the body better than anyone. This is help, nothing more, but the air between us had grown thick, charged with something neither of us named. Her breathing had changed again, deeper now, matching the unsteady rhythm of my own. I could feel the faint tremor running through her muscles under my touch, the way her body seemed to lean into every stroke even as she stayed perfectly still. The scent of the cream mixed with her skin, warm lavender and something uniquely hers, flooding my senses until rational thought frayed at the edges. That same evening we opened another bottle of wine on the couch, the second glass loosening what little restraint remained. Elena turned toward me, eyes dark with a hunger she no longer tried to hide. Without a word, she took my hand and placed it deliberately against the soft swell of her breast, the weight of it warm and alive through the thin silk of her robe. I felt the hardened peak pressing into my palm, unmistakable, undeniable. "I know this is madness," she breathed, her voice barely more than a sigh against my cheek, "but I haven't felt alive like this since long before you were born." Every moral fiber I possessed shattered in that instant. The voice that had warned me for weeks fell suddenly silent as I leaned in and kissed her for the first time. Her lips tasted of red wine and the faint salt of unshed tears, trembling under mine with a vulnerability that undid me completely. There is no going back now, the realization hit like a wave. She is nearly 70, old enough to be my mother, the respected urologist who once stood between my husband and suffering. Yet I have never wanted anyone more, never felt this pull that makes my whole body ache with the need to surrender. My hand stayed where she had placed it, learning the shape of her through fabric, while her fingers threaded gently into my hair, holding me close as if afraid I might vanish. The kiss deepened slowly, hesitantly, each of us testing the fragile line we had just crossed. I could feel her heart racing beneath my palm, matching the frantic beat of my own. Shame and craving twisted together so tightly I could no longer tell them apart. Outside the window, the summer night pressed close, silent and watchful, as if the whole world held its breath with us. And then her hand slid down to cover mine, pressing it more firmly against her, a silent invitation that sent fresh fire racing through my veins. We moved to her room in trembling silence, the hallway creaking under our careful steps like it knew our secret. The door clicked shut behind us, the lock turning with a soft finality that made my stomach twist. Dim lamplight painted everything in warm gold, softening the years on her skin as I helped her slip free of the silk robe. My lips found the hollow of her throat first, then the delicate line of her collarbone, tracing every faint mark time had left like a map only I was allowed to read. She tasted of lavender and something deeper, something that pulled at me until breathing felt optional. When my hands finally ventured lower, parting her gently, I felt the slick warmth waiting there, her body answering before words could. Elena gasped my name, a broken whisper that wrapped around my heart like a prayer no one else would ever hear. Chopin still drifted faintly from her speaker, notes rising and falling with our uneven breaths, turning the moment into something sacred and stolen all at once. In that hushed space she wasn't the celebrated doctor anymore, wasn't the woman who had once examined my husband with clinical detachment. She was simply Elena, trembling beneath my touch, silver strands slipping through my fingers as I lost myself in her. We moved together in slow, desperate waves, every sigh and shiver binding us tighter, our voices hushed against each other's skin, murmuring our secret like a vow we both feared breaking. Her own release following like an echo that left us both shaking, foreheads pressed together in the afterglow. Afterward we laid angled in sheets that smelled of us, hearts still hammering against ribs as if trying to escape. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel, my daughter's car pulling in far too early, headlights slicing through the curtains like accusation. Eleanor's eyes flew open, wide with sudden panic, her hand clutching my wrist hard enough to bruise. We scrambled in frantic silence, smoothing wrinkles from the bed, tugging clothes back into place with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. No one can ever know, she breathed against my ear, voice cracking with the weight of what we'd done. Not your daughter, not anyone. Guilt slammed into me like cold rain after drought, yet beneath it burned an arc, electric thrill that refused to die. I had just crossed every line with a woman nearly 70 in my own home, while family could have walked in at any second. What kind of person does that make me? And why does the memory already make my pulse race again, craving the impossible all over? She moved out 2 weeks later, citing finished renovations with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. We still trade careful messages now and then, words wrapped in layers of ordinary news so no one else could guess. My daughter has no idea the elegant older woman who once saved her father's life became the one who cracked me open in ways I can't explain even to myself. Holding this cream-colored invitation today, watching my girl marry someone half her age, I feel Elena's absence like a phantom touch on my skin. The scent of lavender cream still haunts me when I close my eyes at night, pulling me back to that locked room and the storm we unleashed together. I wonder if she'll come to the wedding. I wonder if, across a crowded aisle, our gazes will lock for one forbidden second and we'll both remember how gravity once pulled two unlikely souls into collision. Some boundaries once crossed leave you forever standing on the edge, aching for the fall that never quite ends.